Columbia, South Carolina is known for its student nightlife, especially an area called Five Points. Restaurants, bars, lights, and crowds filling the streets as closing time approaches. On a typical Thursday night, it was no different. Among the students enjoying the evening was 21-year-old Samantha Josephson, a senior preparing to graduate from the University of South Carolina. Her friends had planned a small celebration. Samantha had just been accepted into law school, and it felt like the beginning of everything she'd worked for. But after hours of standing, laughing, and celebrating, Samantha was ready to head home. She didn't want to pull her friends away from the fun, so she slipped outside to call an Uber. According to her boyfriend, whom she spoke to briefly, the ride was already on its way. Cameras later showed her stepping out onto the curb alone, waiting under the glow of streetlights while groups of students moved around her. What she didn't know was that her Uber had already arrived, but on the opposite side of the street. She mistakenly walked the wrong direction, taking a left instead of a right, and the driver eventually canceled when he couldn't find her. Samantha didn't seem aware of this. She continued checking nearby cars, leaning forward each time a dark vehicle approached. At the same time, a black Chevrolet Impala had been circling the area for nearly 15 minutes. Surveillance video showed it looping around the blocks repeatedly, but never stopping for anyone, never rolling down its windows, drifting almost like a predator watching its surroundings. The driver didn't appear to be waiting for someone. He appeared to be looking for someone. When he made another slow loop through the lot, he finally pulled into the small parking area beside where Samantha stood. She glanced at the car, dark, similar to the type of car she expected, and walked toward it as though it was her Uber. With the chaos of late-night crowds, loud music, flashing lights, and multiple rideshares pulling in and out, it would have been easy to confuse one car for another. Samantha opened the back door and got in. It was the last time she was seen alive on video. Inside the vehicle, the windows were tinted enough that nothing could be seen from outside. Investigators later determined the doors were locked with child safety settings, meaning she wouldn't have been able to open them even if she realized the mistake. Not long after driving off, the car was seen heading in the opposite direction of Samantha's apartment, something she would have recognized almost immediately. The next morning, her friends assumed she'd simply stayed at another friend's place. But when Samantha didn't show up for her morning shift at a local restaurant, a job she never missed, they knew something was wrong. Calls went unanswered, messages stayed unread. Using the tracking feature on her phone, they followed the last known location, but the device had stopped sending data. They rushed to the bar where Samantha was last seen and obtained the security footage, which showed her stepping into the Impala instead of her actual Uber. 10 hours had already passed. Police classified the case as more than a routine missing person report. With no contact, no phone activity, and no sign she'd gone anywhere willingly, investigators began treating it as a potential abduction. A citywide alert went out for a black Chevy Impala. But by then, Samantha was already far from Columbia. While Samantha's friends anxiously retraced her steps, investigators were already working with only one solid lead: a blurry surveillance video of a black Chevrolet Impala picking her up that night. The challenge was enormous. Columbia was a large city, and hundreds of similar cars were on the road. With no license plate visible and no idea who the driver was, officers were operating with little more than the make, color, and general shape of the vehicle. Time was slipping away. Meanwhile, troubling clues began to emerge almost immediately. Someone had attempted to use Samantha's debit card, first at a Wells Fargo ATM in Sumter, about 45 miles from Columbia, and then multiple times in other locations. The transactions were unsuccessful, but they were time-stamped, giving investigators a rough timeline of the suspect's movements after Samantha vanished. At the same time, employees at a nearby Wendy's reported seeing a suspicious car in their drive-thru early that morning. What caught their attention wasn't the driver, it was the back seat. A white sheet draped awkwardly over the headrest and seat looked completely out of place. Workers later said it seemed like the driver was trying to cover something. Another small detail, another piece of a puzzle that was quickly taking shape. But the most chilling development came from nearly 90 minutes outside Columbia, in a quiet rural area of Clarendon County. Two turkey hunters, walking through a remote patch of land in the tiny town of New Zion, made a discovery that instantly triggered alarm. They had come across the body of a young woman, lying face down, her clothing matching the description from the surveillance footage. It was Samantha. She had multiple wounds, injuries across her arms, legs, face, and feet. Her body showed evidence of a desperate struggle, defensive marks that revealed she had fought with everything she had. The news devastated her family, who were already on their way to South Carolina after hearing she was missing. Halfway through their drive, they received the call every parent fears. Their daughter had been found. Back in Columbia, detectives pushed harder to identify the driver of the black Impala. They issued a citywide alert, and officers patrolled 5 Points nonstop. One officer, Jeffrey Kraft, felt compelled to return to the same area where Samantha disappeared. His instincts told him the suspect might be nearby. After hours of searching, he spotted what he believed was the same black Impala, just a couple of blocks away from the abduction site. It was around 2:30 a.m., quiet, the streets nearly empty. Officer Kraft pulled the vehicle over. The driver hesitated before stopping, and when he finally rolled to a halt, the officer immediately sensed something was wrong. The seat was pushed far back. The interior smelled strongly of marijuana. When Kraft asked for the driver's license, the man claimed he didn't have one. His behavior became increasingly erratic. Within seconds, as the officer instructed him to step out of the car, the driver suddenly bolted, sprinting into the darkness. Officer Kraft chased him, but lost sight of him within moments. The fleeing suspect was fast. But while the suspect ran, he made a critical mistake. He left the car behind. Inside the Impala, officers discovered items that didn't belong to the driver. A set of keys with a pink keychain, a phone that matched Samantha's description, bloodstains in the back seat, and what appeared to be a large amount of blood soaked into the upholstery. Even child safety locks were engaged. It didn't take long for police to identify the suspect who ran from the car, 24-year-old Nathaniel David Rowland. When officers canvassed the area, Rowland was found less than 2 blocks from where he fled. Breathless, claiming he had the flu, he was detained and taken in for questioning. He denied everything. But the evidence had already begun to speak louder than his words. As investigators dig deeper, Rowland's story starts to unravel, and a hidden witness comes forward with explosive information about his behavior after the crime. What she reveals will shift the entire case. Once Nathaniel Rowland was in custody, detectives began building a timeline of the hours after Samantha vanished. Although Rowland insisted he hadn't been in 5 Points and claimed he spent the night attending house parties, he couldn't provide names, addresses, or anyone who could back up his story. In contrast, the car he fled from was overflowing with incriminating details. Investigators quickly learned that the Impala didn't belong to Rowland, but he had been using it regularly. A female friend named Maria Howard was listed on paperwork found inside the vehicle, including a handwritten eviction notice from her apartment. Searching for her became the next step. When they located Maria and brought her in for questioning, she hesitated at first. She seemed frightened and overwhelmed, unsure of how much she should say. But when detectives mentioned Samantha's disappearance and the Impala found abandoned on the street, her entire demeanor shifted. Slowly, she began unraveling a story that investigators hadn't heard before, a story that would dramatically strengthen the case. Maria explained that she had met up with Rowland the morning after Samantha was taken. At that time, she didn't know about the missing person alert or the discovery of the young woman's body. She thought Rowland was simply acting strange, tired, anxious, unusually quiet. But once she got into the Impala to drive him around, she noticed something immediately disturbing. The car smelled like bleach, and there were reddish-brown smears across parts of the dashboard and interior panels. Roland was wearing gloves. He was scrubbing the center console, the door, and parts of the back seat. Maria asked what happened. He snapped at her, telling her to mind your business. But that wasn't all she had seen. In the back seat, a large white sheet had been draped across the headrest and cushions. Maria asked about that too. Roland again shut her down, refusing to explain anything. At some point, she saw him pull out a multi-tool, a folding weapon with 2 blades. It had what looked like dried blood on it. He began wiping it off with paper towels. Her instincts told her something wasn't right. She asked again what was going on, why there was blood, why he was cleaning with gloves on. Again, he repeated the same cold phrase, mind your business. Maria eventually dropped him off at an apartment he had been staying at. But that uneasy feeling clung to her. When the news later began reporting the case of a missing college student and a black Impala connected to the investigation, she recognized the car instantly. Fear kept her silent at first. She had a child. She didn't know what Roland was capable of. But investigators found the eviction notice from her residence, located her, and asked again if she knew anything. This time, she couldn't hold back. Her testimony cracked the case open. Detectives quickly searched her residence. In an outside trash can, wrapped inside multiple grocery bags, they found exactly what Maria had described: the double-bladed tool, paper towels used to wipe blood, rubber gloves, and the clothing Roland had been wearing the night before. Some items were soaked, some bore traces of blood, some had marks that looked like scratch trails, thin striations running down a black leather jacket, pointing to a violent struggle. If the trash pickup had come 1 day earlier, all of this evidence would have been lost forever. Maria's information also clarified the suspicious Wendy's footage showing a white sheet in the back seat, the same sheet she had already told investigators about. The sheet, it seemed, had been placed over the blood-covered interior to hide what was underneath. But despite everything, the defense would later claim none of this proved Roland was the killer. They would insist the state had still not connected him directly to the moment Samantha entered the Impala. No fingerprints, no DNA under the nails, no eyewitnesses who could see inside the tinted car. The prosecution needed more, and as they kept digging, more they would find. Alert hit to rehook for Part 4. With Maria Howard's testimony and the physical evidence pulled from her apartment trash, investigators felt the case against Nathaniel Rowland was growing stronger. But prosecutors were well aware that something major was still missing: a clear, undeniable link placing Rowland behind the wheel while Samantha was in the car. Surveillance footage had captured the Impala circling 5 points, but the tinted windows hid the driver's identity. To convict beyond reasonable doubt, they needed more. That more arrived when police uncovered footage from a small cell phone repair shop in Colombia. The store owner, Asher Williams, came forward after police released information about a missing phone belonging to Samantha. The morning after Samantha disappeared, a man had walked into his store trying to sell an iPhone that didn't seem to belong to him. Williams remembered the encounter clearly. The man, wearing the hoodie pulled tightly around his face and gloves, behaved nervously and repeatedly avoided questions. He wanted quick cash. Williams found the whole situation suspicious, but the man became agitated when the store refused the sale and eventually left. When detectives showed him photos of Nathaniel Rowland, Asher didn't hesitate. He recognized the same person who had tried to sell the phone. In court, he pointed directly at Rowland, identifying him as the man who had walked into his shop that morning. The courtroom grew silent. This was the first eyewitness to directly tie Rowland to Samantha's belongings after her disappearance. Next came the forensic experts. They presented blood analysis from the back seat of the Impala. The stains soaked deep into the upholstery, pooling on the floor, smeared across the door frames. Technicians described what they found as extensive and heavy, far beyond accidental transfer. It was clear Samantha had been injured inside that car. They also introduced one of the most disturbing pieces of evidence: Samantha's footprint pressed onto the inside of the rear window. It wasn't a smudge, it was a clear print,
created by force, showing she had kicked the glass trying to escape. This small detail hit the jury hard. Prosecutors said it represented Samantha's final attempt to survive. But the defense still had a powerful argument. No DNA from Rowland was found on Samantha's body, not under her torn fingernails, not on her clothing, not on her hands or legs. The defense attorney hammered this point mercilessly, repeating it over and over. Zero DNA. They also pointed out that Rowland had no scratches, no cuts, no marks at all, despite prosecutions alleging Samantha fought violently for her life. They questioned how someone could carry out such a brutal attack in a confined space without suffering even the smallest injury. It was the defense's strongest line of attack. But the prosecution wasn't finished. They brought in more forensic testimony to explain why no DNA matched. The theory, Rowland was wearing multiple layers of clothing, gloves, and possibly even used the child blocks to restrict movement, limiting skin-to-skin contact. They emphasized that the lack of Rowland's DNA didn't mean the absence of evidence. The car, the blood, the knife discovered in the trash, the attempted ATM withdrawals, the phone, all of it pointed to one person. To strengthen the timeline further, investigators presented surveillance from a Wendy's drive-thru. The driver in the Impala was clearly Rowland, sitting behind the wheel with the white sheet covering the back seat, exactly as Maria had described. Piece by piece, the prosecution built a narrative they hoped would leave no room for doubt. Still, the courtroom remained tense. The defense stuck to one message. He wasn't identified in the car when Samantha was alive. The jury would soon have to decide which story they believed.
After days of testimony, forensic analysis, emotional witness statements, and fierce legal arguments, the courtroom felt heavier with every passing hour. The jurors had listened to both sides carefully, the prosecution painting a picture of a calculated predator, and the defense insisting that the state lacked the one thing that mattered most: proof Nathaniel Rowland was behind the wheel when Samantha Josephson stepped into the wrong car. Now, it was time for the final showdown. Prosecutors delivered their closing argument with a force that filled the room. They pointed again at the photos of the Impala's back seat soaked in blood, at the double-bladed weapon retrieved from the trash, at Samantha's footprint smeared against the window, her final silent scream for help. They reminded the jury that her belongings, including her phone and keys, were found right where Rowland had fled from the car. They emphasized that he ran when stopped. He hid. He said nothing. And when he finally spoke, he offered no explanation for the blood-soaked car or the attempts to use Samantha's bank card. This trail of evidence, the prosecutor said, leads to one man, the defendant. Then came the defense. They walked up slowly, calmly, and delivered one message with unwavering consistency. No DNA. Not on her hands, not beneath her nails, not on her clothes. If Samantha had fought as desperately as the prosecution claimed, how could the attacker escape without even a scratch? How could not one trace of him be found on her body? They argued the state hadn't met its burden, not fully, not unquestionably. The courtroom was silent when the defense finished. Even the judge seemed to feel the weight of what had been said. Then, the case was handed to the jury. It took them just over 1 hour to return. When the four persons stood, the entire room held its breath. Guilty. Guilty of kidnapping. Guilty of murder, and guilty of possession of a weapon during a violent crime. Samantha's family cried, holding one another tightly. Relief and grief collided in the same painful moment. But the case wasn't over. The judge moved directly into sentencing. This was the first time Samantha's family could speak directly to the man responsible for taking her life. Her father, Seymour, stepped forward first. His voice shook as he described the agony of losing his daughter. The images burned into his mind, the sleepless nights, the desperate wish to turn back time.
Samantha's mother followed, speaking through tears about the pure light her daughter had always carried and how that light had been violently stolen. Her older sister Sydney broke down describing the moment she learned of Samantha's death, collapsing to the floor, screaming because her other half was gone forever. Their pain filled the room. Then, Roland had an opportunity to speak. He maintained his innocence. He claimed the wrong man had been convicted and that investigators didn't look in the right places. But he offered no explanation for any of the evidence: the blood, the knife, the car, the belongings, the evasion, or the lies. The judge looked at him and spoke with stern clarity. "You are heartless, completely without remorse." He sentenced him to life in prison. With the gavel's final strike, the case ended, but Samantha's legacy was just beginning. Her family launched the What's My Name Foundation, named after the safety question rideshare passengers are urged to ask, "Who are you picking up?" They transformed their pain into a mission to prevent even one more young person from entering the wrong car at night. At the University of South Carolina's commencement ceremony, thousands of students stood together. On the count of 3, they shouted the words that now live on as Samantha's message to the world. "What's my name? My name is Samantha Josephson." Samantha's story became a call to action and a promise that her life, though stolen, would continue to save others.